Can you do it again? The question doesn't sound hostile. It isn't a challenge, shouted from across the room. It's almost worse than that. It's casual, curious, the kind of question that only comes after you've just seen something you can't quite explain. And for a moment, nobody else speaks. You can hear the air conditioner. You can hear a faint clink of glass somewhere behind you. You can hear someone shift their weight, just slightly, because no one wants to be the person who breaks the spell. Bruce Lee is standing there, calm as ever, with that look on his face that people later struggle to describe. Not angry, not proud, just alert, like his body is waiting for a signal his mind already gave it. In front of him is a table, a normal table, solid, ordinary. The kind of object your brain files away as not supposed to move unless someone pushes it, and then 6 seconds later, it moves. Not once, twice, a clean, undeniable shift. Like something invisible struck it, and then struck it again 2 separate moments, 2 separate jolts enough to make the room go silent in a way that feels physical, like the silence has weight. The problem is what it suggests, because if that table really moved the way they said it did, then the question isn't, can you do it again? The real question is, what exactly are we looking at when we look at Bruce Lee? The table move twice story is one of those Bruce Lee moments that lives in the borderland between documented skill and expanding legend. It gets told the way people tell stories about lightning. Quick, bright, and just out of reach of measurement. And that's why it matters. Bruce Lee didn't just become famous because he was fast. Plenty of people are fast. He became a cultural myth because he made people doubt their own assumptions about human limits, what the body can do, what the mind can direct, and what happens when discipline turns into something so sharp it looks like magic. Even today, decades later, the world still argues about him in the same breath. Was he a once-in-a-generation athlete? A revolutionary philosopher? A movie star with perfect timing? The answer is probably yes, and that's what makes him difficult to dismiss. Because Bruce Lee wasn't built to be easily categorized. He was built, piece by piece, obsession by obsession, into a person who treated the human body like a laboratory and the human mind like a weapon you could train. When people talk about Bruce Lee, they often start with the obvious, the speed, the famous footage. The 1-inch punch demonstrations that still circulate online and spark endless debate about physics and performance. If you've ever seen clips of him striking with that sharp, compact power and explosion that looks too short to be Relu, already know what the legend feels like in your stomach. There's a reason people watch those moments on repeat. They're trying to catch the secret with their eyes, as if the secret is something visible. Source: he wanted the shortest line between intention and result. No wasted motion, no decorative effort. No, because that's how it's always been done. That's why he created Jeet Kune, a name that gets repeated so often it can lose its meaning, even though the idea behind it was almost insultingly simple. Absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is specifically your own. In other words, Bruce Lee wasn't trying to preserve tradition. He was trying to strip the human being down to its most functional truth. That mindset is part of why stories like the moving table exist at all. Because once people saw how he moved in controlled demonstrations, how he could generate force from inches, how he could stop and start like a switch, they began to assume the boundaries were different for him. They began to watch everything he did the way people watch a magician's hands, except the magic was attached to a body that trained like a machine. And Bruce Lee did train like a machine, not in the simple way people mean when they say, he worked hard. Lots of people work hard for a few months. How cleanly you could coordinate the whole body behind a single moment. There's a reason so many training discussions still circle back to him, even outside martial arts circles. He wasn't just practicing moves. Picture a small private space, not a stadium, not a film set with cameras and marks on the floor. This is a place where people are close enough to see details, close enough to notice whether someone cheats, close enough to notice if something is staged. There are a few people present, students, friends, maybe a skeptic or two, because there's always a skeptic when a legend walks in. Someone has heard the stories, but hearing isn't believing. They want proof. They want to see what's real when there's no choreography, no editing, no slow motion to help. The table sits there as an object of normal life, which is exactly why it's perfect. A table is not impressive. A table is not dramatic. A table is what you eat on, what you lean on, what you ignore. And because it's ordinary, it becomes the most convincing witness in the room. Bruce stands near it, not like someone preparing for a show, but like someone preparing to demonstrate a principle. His posture isn't watch me. His posture is watch what happens when the body obeys the mind without hesitation. There's a moment described right before the first movement, a pause that feels like nothing is happening. But to trained eyes, that's when everything is happening. That's when the body loads, when the nervous system lines up, when breath and balance settle into place. It's the moment before thunder. And then some kind of strike or compact burst of force happens so fast it's almost not registered as motion in the observer's mind. Because the brain needs time to translate "I saw a thing" into "I understand a thing." But the table understands instantly. It shifts. A sharp, short movement, enough to make people blink and look at each other. And in that blink, human nature arrives right on schedule. Someone says it, "Can you do it again?" Not because they want him to perform, but because they're trying to protect their own reality. Because if it happened once, it could be luck. It could be angle. It could be the table already unstable. But twice is pattern. Twice is evidence. Bruce doesn't rush. He doesn't get defensive. He stays composed, almost indifferent, as if the request doesn't offend him, because he knows the truth isn't in the spectacle. The truth is in the method. And then comes that 6-second gap, the part that makes the whole thing cinematic. Those 6 seconds stretch. You can imagine the room watching his hands, his feet, his shoulders. You can imagine the skeptic narrowing their eyes. You can imagine someone holding their breath without realizing it, because anticipation does strange things to the body. And then the table moves again. But here's the detail that makes this story stick. It's not just that the table moves again, it moves twice in response to that request. As if the second demonstration contains a second punctuation mark, a final underline. Not once, but 2 jolts, 2 distinct shifts, like Bruce is saying. Without words, you're not watching carefully enough. Now, if you're listening closely, you can feel the question forming in your mind. How? This is where the Bruce Lee legend becomes a mirror, because different people answer how based on what they already believe about reality. Some people hear this story and immediately sort it into the trick category. That's not an insult, that's a rational defense. If your worldview says, objects don't move unless force is applied in a way I can see, then you assume deception, because your brain prefers the idea of a trick over the idea that your model of human capability is incomplete. So, was it a trick? If you were going to fake something like this, you'd need a hidden mechanism, a loose leg on the table, a wire, a subtle push with the hip, a floor that vibrates, something that creates movement without revealing its cause. And in a controlled environment, those things can happen. Stories can be exaggerated. People can remember details wrong. A small movement becomes a big movement in retelling, because the emotion of surprise amplifies memory. That's one explanation, and it's fair. But another explanation is less comforting, because it doesn't require anything supernatural. It only requires a level of physical skill that most people never train for, and therefore underestimate. The human body can generate shock in ways that look impossible if you don't understand how force transfers through structure. A short strike can still produce a big effect if the timing is perfect, if the contact is precise, if the object is hit at the right point. If the force travels through the legs and hips and spine and out through a compact delivery system. In other words, leverage and timing can make inches feel like feet. Think of it this way, you can tap a heavy door all day and nothing happens. But if you strike it at the right point, with the right timing, especially if the hinges are slightly loose, you can make it shudder. Not because you're strong, but because you're accurate. That's not magic. That's mechanics meeting precision. Bruce Lee's entire philosophy of movement was built around that idea. Maximum effect with minimum motion. And if someone had trained their nervous system to fire like a whip-tight fast, coordinated then a small movement could deliver a big result. There's also the possibility that the table moved twice wasn't the table being struck twice, but rather the table reacting with a primary jolt and then a secondary settling shift, like when you slam a car door and the whole car shivers once, then again as the suspension settles. People interpret that as 2 movements, because it is 2 movements, but they come from one action. And then there's the third perspective, the one that keeps the mystery alive without disrespecting reality. Maybe it happened, but the story grew around it because Bruce Lee was the kind of person who made growth inevitable. Legends don't grow in a vacuum. They grow around someone who leaves emotional impact. When Bruce Lee entered a room, he didn't just bring skill, he brought intensity. Not loud intensity, focused intensity. A sense that the temperature changed because he was paying attention in a way most people don't. And when someone like that does something impressive, the moment feels bigger than the action. The meaning expands. So you end up with a story that might have started as a simple demonstration of shock power and became, over the years, a kind of parable. And that's where Bruce Lee becomes more than a martial artist. Because even if you never confirm the exact details of the table moving twice, the point of the story is not actually the table. The point is the question. Can you do it again? That question is the dividing line between performance and mastery. Anyone can do something once. Many people can do something once. The world is full of once. One lucky moment, one good day, one perfect try. But doing it again, on command, under pressure, in front of skeptical eyes, that's a different category of skill. That's repeatability. That's control. That's discipline made visible. And Bruce Lee's entire life was a campaign against randomness. He wasn't interested in maybe. He wanted reliability. He wanted his body to respond the way a blade responds when you swing it, clean, direct, and consistent. That's why, when people quote him, they often quote lines that sound like motivation but are actually warnings. The famous idea of fearing the person who has practiced one kick 10,000 times isn't just a catchy sentence. It's a statement about inevitability. Repetition turns technique into instinct. Instinct turns into speed. Speed turns into power, because power arrives before the other person is ready to brace. And that loops us right back to the table, because the table story isn't really about strength. It's about preparedness meeting a moment. Now, let's talk about Be Like Water. Because no Bruce Lee narrative is complete without it, and it's often misunderstood. When Bruce said, "Be like water," people turned it into an aesthetic, something soft and poetic. But Bruce didn't mean be gentle, he meant be adaptable. Water doesn't argue with the shape of a container. It becomes the shape, and that adaptability is not weakness, it's strategy. Water can drip, water can flow, water can crash. And the reason it can do all of those things is because it doesn't cling to one identity. Bruce Lee approached combat the same way. He rejected rigid tradition in favor of what worked. He looked at styles the way an engineer looks at tools. If a tool is useful, keep it. If it's not, discard it. And once you stop defending tradition, you become free to evolve. That's why the table story fits him so well. Whether the moment happened exactly as told or not, it expresses something true about his approach. He trained for effect, not appearance. He trained for the result you can see in the environment, not the movement you can admire in slow motion. That kind of mindset bleeds into everything, not just martial arts. It's the mindset of someone who asks, what's the simplest action that produces the strongest outcome? It's the mindset of someone who doesn't confuse effort with progress. It's the mindset of someone who is willing to look foolish while learning, because mastery is more important than approval. And Bruce Lee paid for that mindset. People forget that behind the legend was a man who pushed himself so hard he scared people close to him. He didn't just train when it was comfortable, he trained when it hurt. He trained when he was tired. He trained when no one was watching, which is the only kind of training that actually counts. Because when the room is watching and someone asks, "Can you do it again?" the only thing you can rely on is what you've done 1,000 times when no one asked. That's what makes the table story emotionally powerful. It captures the moment when private work becomes public proof. Now, let's be honest, the internet loves Bruce Lee stories, and the internet also loves exaggeration. There are countless dramatic retellings online that frame moments as seconds later mini-movies, and that modern storytelling style can distort as much as it entertains. Source: so how do we honor the story without turning Bruce Lee into a superhero? We do it by treating the table story as a case study, not a religious artifact. What happens when someone trains coordination, timing, structure, and intent to the point that their movements create effects people don't expect? If you've ever watched real footage of Bruce, whether in demonstrations or in candid moments from interviews, you'll notice something. Even when he's calm, his body looks ready. Not tense, ready, like the wiring is different. There are clips from interviews where he casually shows hand-eye coordination that looks effortless. And what you're seeing is not a party trick. You're seeing nervous system refinement. Source: That's the kind of refinement that could make a table story plausible without any need for fantasy. And even if you remain skeptical, there's still something useful here, because the deeper lesson is not Bruce Lee had magic hands. The deeper lesson is this: mastery is often invisible until it isn't. You don't see the thousands of repetitions. You don't see the sore wrists, the bruised knuckles, the endless refining of stance and distance and timing. You don't see the boredom, because boredom is a major ingredient in greatness, and almost no one likes to talk about it. But then you see the table move, and suddenly the invisible becomes visible. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and it's bigger than Bruce Lee. What is your table? What is the thing in your life that seems immovable right now? The problem that doesn't shift, the skill that doesn't come, the goal that feels too heavy, too far, too unrealistic. And what if the answer isn't more motivation? What if the answer is the kind of disciplined repetition that changes what your body and mind can do? Until one day, someone watches you perform and asks quietly, almost nervously, "Can you do it again?" Because that question is a compliment disguised as disbelief. It means your work has started to look like something else. And when you hear it, you don't need to give a speech. You don't need to argue. You don't need to prove anything with words. You just do it again, and maybe you make it move twice. If you enjoyed this story, take a second to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. Because we go deep into moments like this, the ones that sit right on the edge of human potential and human myth. And I really want to hear your take on the table story. Do you think it's real, exaggerated over time, or symbolic of something deeper about Bruce Lee's training and mindset? Leave a comment with your perspective, and while you're there, tell me what impossible thing you're working toward in your own life, because someone out there is going to ask you one day, "Can you do it again?" And I want you to be ready.